there everybody, it's Mark Crilley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today I'm going to be showing how to draw a face that is lit from below with that sort of classic spooky look where all the shadows are cast upon the upper side of the face. Now of course I've already drawn the face here. This video is not about putting in the initial lines. I've got a video that shows you how to do that, and I will link to it in the description. But once you've got the lines in place for a character of your own, doesn't have to look exactly like this one, I'm going to show you where the shadows would go if the face was lit from below. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to do some light shading here across the top of the forehead. Now, as I looked at photos of different faces that were lit from below, I noticed that the shadow that gets cast on the forehead is really a very gradual shadow, in the sense that it doesn't sharply go from light to dark. It is light right here, let's say between the eyebrows, and then it gradually gets darker and darker as you go higher up the forehead. Now, one thing that seemed to happen in a lot of the photos I saw was areas of extra darkness right here at the edge, at the edges of both of the eyebrows. And one of the interesting things about doing a drawing of a face lit from below is I think it makes you aware of the facial structure. In a sense, you start to have to think about the different planes and the shapes that are sort of in between all of the facial features. For example, these the sort of area beneath the eyebrows and above the upper eyelid. Normally you'd be shading that if sun was coming from above, but because it's coming from below, this is all going to stay quite light, quite fully illuminated, and it becomes the upper eyelids themselves that really get a full amount of shadow. Now what I might do is refocus the camera here so that we can have a little closer look at the eyes as I begin to shade them in. Give me just a second here. So yeah, I'm going to refine this shading, all of this probably later on as we get closer to the end of the video. But for now, suffice to say, you get this whole darkened in area on the upper eyelids, and if you're getting really into the details, you may even see a little whitish line that is the sort of the skin of the eyelid itself, that there's a certain thickness to that skin, and so that little area there is going to get lit from below. Now, in photos that I looked at of someone who has relatively pale eyes, one thing that was interesting to me was that it seemed like the eyes were pretty uniformly lit, as if even when the light is coming from below, that this whole area of, let's say this person has blue eyes, that it was relatively uniform. You might expect that it would be, darker in one area, lighter in another area based on where the light was coming from, but I think because there's a sort of a prism-like effect of the irises that sort of just catch the light and hold it in a way. Of course, the pupils are going to be darkened in as usual. And these, as we often see with people with pale-colored eyes, that just around the edge of the iris there is a band of darkness very often. But this does not have so much to do with the lighting situation. What I wanted to talk about was that when the eye is lit from below, you get a dark, it almost looks like eyeliner or something, but you've got this, again, the thickness of the lower eyelid, the flesh of it, creates a shape there where the light can't really get in. The light coming from below can't get to light up this little line of like the thickness of the flesh. So you go ahead and darken that in, and in fact the tear duct, depending on how sharply below the eye the light source is, the tear duct itself can get completely darkened in. And then it becomes pretty crucial for you to understand the sort of shape of the eye socket, the flesh that supports the eye. As I put lines in here, it sort of looks like she has bags under her eyes, and that's not really what the effect that we're going for. But what happens is the the cheekbones, the flesh above the cheekbones, is bulging out in a way that is in a different direction from this plane below the eyes, and so this area over here starts to get darkened in. And again, you start fairly sharply dark right here in this area below, where the sort of the eyeball is supported by this flesh beneath the lower eyelid. And then it gradually fades as it goes down. Again, I'm going to have to refine a lot of this stuff, as I finish up the drawing later on. But just suffice to say that this becomes a very gradient, gradual change here. Now, this area above the eyebrow can, depending on where the light source is, sort of join in with this shading down here. So you end up with really just the area beneath the eyebrow, the sort of flesh above the upper eyelid. That is all going to stay light, lightly colored. Now I'm going to repeat this over here, but I don't want to have the video get bogged down with doing the same thing a second time. So I'm going to move on to one thing that I saw in at least a few different photos. And that was this sort of structural element of the bridge of the nose, or more precisely on the sides of the bridge of the nose. It seemed like there is often a kind of indentation here where the light cannot reach. And so you're seeing me sort of darken in this area where, you know, like if they were wearing glasses or whatever, this would be that sort of classic bridge of the nose area where the band of the glasses would go across the nose. And then this all starts to spread out, the gray or the shading that you're putting in here. This all sort of starts to spread out across here. These are two separate things, but what happens is they sort of gradually flow into one another, this area that I drew a second ago. And I'm going to be doing the same thing over here, but again, to save time, let's just imagine that that repeats, and this repeats over here. But let's start to talk about what happens at the tip of the nose. And for that, thank goodness I have remembered I need to refocus the camera so that we can see that. Give me just a moment as we move down to, I think I'll cover both the nose and the lips in a single shot. So I find this pretty interesting, what happens to the tip of the nose when it's lit from below. Normally, of course, you'd be putting all this shading down here below the tip of the nose. You're flipping it around because the light source is below the nose, and depending on, I suppose, how prominent the person's nose is or how pointed it is, you may get some quite decisively dark shadows here. I'm going to create a sort of a hopefully slightly subtle area of shading right across in a sort of rounded way across the tip of the nose here. But in these areas along the nostril, that might get quite sharply darkened in, where the light just cannot reach into that curved, sort of tucked in area of the nostril, and so that can get quite dark. And then you've got the whole bridge of the nose, and depending on the lighting situation, and it can change quite a lot depending on how where the light is placed, but I think generally speaking, this whole bridge of the nose area is not going to be fully illuminated. And the nose, the tip of the nose, almost casts a shadow upwards across the whole bridge of the nose. Until you get to around that area between the eyes, where the flesh begins to, or the structure of the nose curves in a different direction. And then that, this area remains light up here between the eyebrows. But I'm going to darken in this little band here just a little more to sort of emphasize the tip of the nose. And then, yeah, you may have a more gradual, the rounded tip of the nose causes the shading here to get a little more rounded. Or a little more gradual, I guess I should say. Now coming down here to the area of the upper lip, this becomes darkened in a way that it never normally would be if lit from above. All of this is almost, it's a little bit like with a photograph when they reverse the dark areas and the light areas. It's a bit like that. Now, if you understand the structure of the nostrils, because it's being lit from below, you may actually see this lower edge of the nostril. Maybe not so much where the nose sort of flows into the rest of the upper lip. What I noticed is that, the nostril area, you might get a little bit of darkness there. But in a funny way, the very center between the two sides of the upper lip, this very center often remained fairly well lit. Whereas the sides would get very subtle kind of shading, like I'm trying to do here, holding my pencil very low to the paper so as to get a very light pale gray. And then the upper lip, again, depending on the shape of it, the structure of it, in a lot of photos I saw, the upper lip was itself casting just a little bit of a shadow. And so I'm darkening this area in. All of this requires quite a lot of sort of patience and subtlety, and like I said, I'm going to come back at the end of the process and really work on this shading. But yeah, there's this slightly spooky effect. I mean, the whole thing ends up spooky. I think it is because we're just not used to seeing faces lit from below. It psychologically almost freaks us out a little bit when we see a face lit from below. But anyway, this, like I was saying about how, doing a drawing of a face lit from below, it really helps you understand what the various planes are. You begin to understand how the upper lip is shaped, because this upper area cannot receive the light in such a direct way. But this area of the cheek next to the nostril stays white because it is sort of bulging out, right? And all of this stuff is really helping you to understand structural stuff. I think it's probably helpful beyond just the sort of fun of drawing a face lit from below it. I think it does sort of educate you a little bit about the structure of the face. Now when we come down here, the upper lip itself probably remains mostly white or unshaded, but this area right at the edge of the mouth collects in darkness below that line of the upper lip, and you can begin to shade in the whole, almost the whole area of the lower lip, although because there's kind of a curvature to the lower lip, it is darker at the top, the upper edge of the lower lip, and then gradually lightens up. And what happens, unless the person was wearing like really dark lipstick or something, this whole line down here starts to disappear because if it is really quite brightly lit. And so I put the line in there initially just to see the shape of the lip, but I'm kind of erasing it away now so that we don't really see any line there at all. But I am sort of darkening in at the edges. And I suppose if we see a little bit of the teeth, those might catch a bit of light from below. Maybe a shadow almost getting cast up across the teeth a bit from the lower lip. And what could happen down here is that the chin itself may have a bit of structure below the lower lip that you normally don't really see very much, but because it's being lit from below, you may actually see a bit of shading right here around this sort of rounded area of the tip of the chin. And that may be getting us near to the end of the basic areas, showing you where the light would go and where it wouldn't go in this drawing. I think maybe the sides of the neck might get a little bit of shading where the light can't reach. And I'm going to go ahead and sort of repeat this in time-lapse on the other side of the face in almost a mirror image way. I suppose I should show the ears, though. Hang on a second, I'm going to refocus so that I can shade in one of the ears. All right, so just as I'd said with a lot of this other stuff, you have to have some sense of the structure of the ear so as to know where the shadows would fall. Lit from below, I guess the ear lobe is going to remain white and pale. This sort of structure of the edge of the ear might pick up a little bit of shadow. But this going into the interior of the ear, I think that's where you'd get the real area of darkness there. And then the upper edge here for sure would not be catching a whole lot of light as it curves away from the light source below. Maybe darken in just a bit here and there. To be honest, I couldn't find so much reference for ears lit from below. Some of this is me winging it based on my sense of the structure of the ear. And maybe that is bringing us pretty close to the end of things. What I'm going to do is in time-lapse, I'm going to go ahead and finish up all the shading. I'm going to use my black Prismacolor, my trusty black Prismacolor, to really darken in, make the blacks as black as they can be. I think that's going to add to that sort of spooky effect of this lighting situation. And then at the very end, I'm going to come back and use a little of my beloved white gouache, my new beloved white gouache. I had to replace the old tube with a brand new tube, and we're going to use that for some final touches that I think are really going to make quite a big difference in terms of creating that illusion of light hitting the face from below. So let's go ahead, we'll time-lapse through this whole next bit, and I will be back with the gouache. Alright, so you can see, as always, using a black colored pencil to get those darks really dark certainly makes a pretty big difference in the final effect. But I do want to bring out my beloved white gouache. Here it is. Oh, brand new tube. And I am going to just dilute it ever so slightly with a bit of water so as to make it smooth and ready to apply. And the main thing that I really want to use this gouache for is to get a nice highlight at the bottom of each one of these eyes, because that will really add to the effect of that sort of light shining from below. And you know, even in photographs I definitely saw very clear highlights in that area. Now, because I'm using white paper to begin with, I don't know how much this is going to show up, but just in case, I'm going to add extra white gouache in these areas that get very strongly illuminated by the light from below. See if it does make a difference. And in any case, it could just remind you of where those lightest areas are really going to be. Certainly below the nose. And you'll see that I didn't even bother delineating too much. I suppose adding white light right here might add just a little bit of a differentiation between the bottom of the nose and where it sort of goes to the upper lip. But this whole area of the upper lip itself could get quite strongly illuminated by light from below. So let's see if adding a bit of white gouache has an effect there. And then down here below the lower lip, I think this area right here, this sort of structure of flesh that supports the lower lip to either side of the chin. The chinular region, what we refer to as the chinular region. I'm back to that. All of this stuff can add to the final effect of making it really look as if there is a light shining on her face from below. Let me know, was this too creepy? Should I avoid ever doing a lit from below video again? Is it just kind of freaky somehow to see a face lit this way. But I think, as I said, it is pretty useful for helping you to understand the structure of the face, and that could help you in just more traditional lighting situations, just understanding how these different parts of the face relate to one another. Well, give me just a second. I'm going to go ahead and grab my books so that I can say thank you to anyone who has chosen to support me by getting them, like the Realism Challenge, my book on hyper-realistic illustrations, the two-pencil method, which you saw on display in today's video, and, of course, the Mastering Manga series. Thank you so much to any of you who support me by ordering any of those books, but I think it is time for me to lay down this trusty black Prismacolor pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.